Welcome back to the Art for Human Rights podcast. What must it have been like to hang out with the Beach Boys during their first tour of Eastern Europe in the 60s? What's it like to get your book signed by the Dalai Lama himself? Now, in the pantheon of great artists who support our mission at Art for Human Rights, there is none quite like Czech artist Peter Sis. Born in 1949 in Czechoslovakia, his life and the adventure of his art and his story spans the greatest expression of the 20th century. As you'll see in this conversation, his art, his experiences, his stories living through the Prague Spring of 1968, for example, are just as vivid and colourful as his art. As a tapestry maker, as a children's book illustrator, as a filmmaker, as a fine artist, the limits of creativity for this man know no bounds, and it's a real pleasure and honor to have him on our podcast. To check out what we do and to support what we do, go to artforhumanrights.org. Here comes the conversation with Peter Sis. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So, Peter, it is a great pleasure to have you with us. I appreciate your time calling in from New York. And thank you over the years for your friendship and your contributions to Art for Human Rights and your long relationship with Bill Shipsey as well. I know that I speak for him and the rest of us when I say thanks for jumping on with us and sharing your story today. I'm really excited to get to know you as well. I had the great pleasure of going to your website, petersis.com, and unfortunately, because I don't speak your native tongue, I used the silly Google Translate, and I was able to read through your timeline, which is on your synopsis page, which is a beautiful kind of retrospective of back through the middle of the 20th century. When you were born, and then all of the amazing things that you've done and seen and the people you've met. And so for me, the most kind of the starting point for me, I'd like to just learn from you and hear what the experience was like, your background. You came from Czechoslovakia, you were born there. What was it like growing up in the 1950s and 60s? Can you sketch me a portrait of what you remember and the flavor, the feeling at the time?
So I always think about how now I have to say I'm born in Czechia. I hate it. Before that it was Czech Republic. Before that it was Czechoslovakia. So I was born into Czechoslovakia, but as a baby you don't know where you're born. So I was lucky, I guess. I had two loving parents. I was born in the city called Brno. I had no idea. I was fed, I was changed. I played with other kids, but unknowing to me, I was born just at the moment when 5 years after the Second World War and the Communist Party took over the whole Eastern Bloc. It became sort of empire of the Soviet Union. Again, I know nothing, I'm playing, but you can sense, as a child, you see lots of marching people with guns and red flags. I loved it. I loved the airplanes, tanks, everything. It was military parades. So I grew up going to school. All of a sudden, everything changed. You were expected to become a young pioneer, and there was like you would have statues of Stalin and Lenin and the different heroes of the Soviet pantheon. And the parents wouldn't explain too much because when you're a little child, you become very confused if somebody says it's not exactly as it is, it's a different way. So I went through the whole process of going to school. It got a little bit spiced up because my father was a filmmaker who traveled to Tibet when I was 4. He got stuck in Tibet for 2 years. So I didn't even know what he looked like when he came back. And then he had these stories about Tibet and monasteries and Dalai Lama. So I got it all mixed up with the propaganda at school. I became a young pioneer. I marched in these 5th of May and 1st of May and 9th of May and November marches, and I was really enthusiastic. And then I started to become older, I guess like 9, 10, and I would see the things are not exactly as they say they are, that people were saying different things that they were doing. And there was some people who were better off and some people who had nothing. So there were lots of questions. And I think at age about 12, 13 came this whole influence of people started to play music from somewhere else and tell stories. But the stories were told stories because people now, when I speak to our kids, we had no internet or even television. So everything was like sort of talking and hearing things. And sometimes then at night you could stand with transistor radio and you could catch between 10 and 11 some music from Radio Luxembourg. And we started to be really sort of not believing what we were hearing and believing all these strange stories, which sort of made us into huge fans of bands like Beatles and the Rolling Stones we didn't know, and we got completely involved with that, and we formed our own bands, and it created tension with schools and the art we were doing. And I think the tension continued till late 60s. And Czechoslovakia was sort of becoming more of a free country from like 65 till 68. And in 68 came this government which said we have to create this socialism with human face, and we have to stop censoring things, and we have to tell the truth. And then we were like 17 or 18, and we were so enthusiastic about all this. So it became probably the most enthusiastic and most wonderful time of my life, because it was 68. All of a sudden we were able to get passport and travel and hitchhike around Europe and go to it. So, and then of course it became way too much. So the Soviet tanks and the Soviet army came and completely crushed this movement, this Prague Spring.
Yeah.
In that moment, half of my friends sort of emigrated all over the world, to South Africa, to Sweden, to England. And I started to learn the lessons that if you make art, you can't say everything you want. It's better for me to do animated films, because then it was happening in another dimension and I could put it, I was in the dark. I said, this will happen later, this happened before. So that was my sort of way to do my art in animation.
Wow.
So in the way, it was a sort of process of learning about the world through whatever was happening to me.
And yeah, incredible. And just you mentioned the Prague Spring, and when I was a kid studying history, that was in the history book, and that unfortunately, like so many of the examples of massive historical moments that happen around the world, they are just summarized in 2 or 3 sentences, where someone died, someone became a president, someone got rich, whatever it might be, and then that's it. Never mind the massive ramifications that affected thousands or millions of people right there on the day at the time. So what was do you remember any specific moments, or August 21st, Russian tanks everywhere, coming into the capital city, Prague? Where were you? Was there a kind of a particular moment or a particular memory where you came face to face with that socialism with a human face, so to speak? It might have not been, it was anything but human, I'd imagine, at that moment.
That was the end of it, of the human face. But no, I was participating as much as I could, as being student who was 18. So that the build-up, I participated in forming some new youth organization and making posters. But because already for 2 years I was able to go and travel, I traveled in 68 to England. Wow. And I was supposed to meet my friends in Denmark. And it was so amazing for us who were not able to travel before, just go around these countries. Even we were just hitchhiking. And we were supposed to be back in the end of August. And my sister went to Italy with my father, and my mother was the only one who stayed home. And everybody from these early spring, people were talking, are these Soviets going to do something, or are they going to let it happen, Prague Spring? And I was in London when I heard, when they woke me up and said the Russian army entered Prague, and I spoke to my mother, and then the connections got broken. I was trying to get to Denmark to meet with my friends. In Denmark, I stayed in some hostel where they put all the Czech refugees, because we are thinking we have to we were naive. So we were thinking we have to form some military unit and go fight the Russians. And I waited for like a month in Denmark. Then I met with my whole family in Munich, in Germany, and we were deciding if we're going to go back. Again, naively, we said this cannot last for a long time. It will be over in 2 years and we'll go back to normal. So we drove back to Prague and Prague. So I never experienced the impact, the tanks coming to my street or shooting at people. When I came to Prague, the tanks were parked. The soldiers were sort of on every corner. It felt terrible, but it was like I was in the occupied city. I didn't see the physical. I would think, would I be there in August? Would I be there when it happened? Probably like most of my friends, I would just like run somewhere. I would go to another country because certainly nobody was fighting back. This is why it was so amazing in connection to Ukraine, because the Russians came to Hungary or came to Prague or came to Poland, and just because the powers of the tanks and the sheer sort of numbers, people said, okay, we do whatever you want. I remember it was a strange build-up towards August because it was 68, and I went to London through Paris, and there were these huge demonstrations in France in 68, which were about something else. But the whole world, it was Vietnam War, it was in France, I think it was the leftist students who were demonstrating against
it. They nearly had their own communist revolution, didn't they? Yeah.
So there was this whole, that also is another thing which you said very, very well, how big things in our lives, but even historically, just become one line or one paragraph, and people say, oh, this man was burned on the stakes. And then you go like, it changed next 100 years. So here for me, 68 was so important, but now even talking to my kids, like, so what happened in 68? And so it was the most wonderful, people wanted to have better society, but it didn't happen. So it's now like just a little paragraph. Even I think some other countries later on were trying to do the same thing and had success with it. And it's a whole big school of thought between like Czechs after the experiences which came after 68, that they say it was nonsense. It was just like idealistic way of social, I mean, people who wanted to save the idea of socialisms, that they would do it differently, but in the way it had no chance because the Russians wouldn't allow it anyway.
Yeah.
I shouldn't call them Russians. It's like Soviets, yeah.
It was the Soviets at the time, right? Yeah, yeah. And your father, he was a filmmaker or a film director in the army. He served in the army in the 50s, and he was sent to China, as you said. He went to Tibet for 2 years. And I also read that he met the Dalai Lama.
Right.
And who was, I think, really young at that time. And then I also read that about 40 years later, you had the chance to do the same thing. Would you tell us that story, or and what that experience was like? Did your father ever tell you about, this young man that he met up in the mountains in the Himalayas? Was there any kind of interesting stories he brought back?
He was always telling us stories from Tibet, and when we were like young adolescents, we were going like, oh, not another story from Tibet, because it was like he was a young filmmaker in Brno, and then as all young man, he was drafted into the army like in the 50s, and he was in army films, and together with the cameraman, they were sent to China, because China was then friendly with Soviet Union, China, and all these little countries as a satellite.
Before the split.
So Chinese were looking for some people who would teach Chinese filmmakers how to make documentary films. My father had 2 or 3 short films made, so they sent him mostly because he was young, so he would survive all the planes, were like some military planes, and the food and everything. So he came to China in 52 with the cameraman, and they were supposed to teach the Chinese how to make films. I was a little boy, I was the firstborn, but my sister was born also. And we were like left behind, and he told my mother, I'll be back for Christmas or something. And in a way, it was lucky for him, because 50s were the worst sort of oppressive years with the So he avoided that whole political sort of tension in Prague. We didn't hear from him much, because in those days, again, you couldn't make a phone call. You were sending letters, which came 3-4 months later than they were mailed. And he according to his stories and his books, he came to Beijing. They were talking about the films. And in that time, the Chinese are deciding, because he's working for Chinese army, people's army, that they will invade Tibet. But my father doesn't really know what Tibet is. He's like in this big country, which is exotic as it is. They eat with the chopsticks. That's the beautiful palaces. And all of a sudden they say, we are going to one province of China, which is really backward, and we have to bring civilization there, the hospitals and electricity. And he's put with the cameraman and the crew of about 30 Chinese filmmakers, and they are flown to under the Himalayas, and then they make this trek up the Himalayas, and the Chinese People's Army is building this road to Tibet. Tibet was very protected through the centuries because it was just very difficult to get there. So the English, who were always getting everywhere, they got there at some point, but everybody was badly damaged through these travels. So my father was making this film how the Chinese are building the road and exploding the rocks and climbing over the rivers. And I look at this film. There's a big film he made, which is like a propaganda film for Chinese, and you see the volume of this construction. And that at some point they say the Dalai Lama is coming. Dalai Lama is coming. In that time, he already knows the Dalai Lama is the Buddhist head of the Tibetan people, and he meets 18-year-old Dalai Lama, who is this beautiful.
Wow. 18.
He's got like this golden, beautiful outfit with the helmet, but he also has like these aviator's glasses. So he looks like some sort of Elvis Dalai Lama.
John Lennon.
Yeah, and he's like so impressive. So they like, and my father in that time starts to change because he's only 28 or something. So he's now actually, he's younger than my son is now, and he starts to become different person. And then in the end of this trip, he became sort of Buddhist, but secret Buddhist because of where he was going back. And he happens to be in the road. There is an accident, and half of the mountain falls down, and he becomes stranded from the big construction. And then he, with the cameraman, get ahead of the construction and come to Potala, to Lhasa. They come ahead of the construction, and in fact have a chance to meet with Dalai Lama and say, like, there are all these people coming behind us, which they know by then. That there also comes the period when young Dalai Lama and his advisors want to be part of People's Republic of China, because they gain so much power. They made Dalai Lama, I think, MP in the MP. He's a member of Congress of Chinese Deputies, because there are all the people in different costumes, and he's trying to work something better for Tibetan people for next 5 years, because this is like 1954, so he stays in Tibet till 1959. In 1959, there is uprising of they can't take it, like the Tibetan people, the oppression of the people's army. So there's uprising. They have old guns, of little horses. The Chinese just beat them in no time, and lots of people escape through and go to India. And so His Holiness is still now in Dharamsala in India. I made a book about it like 20 years or more ago, which was a tribute to my father and his stories. And when the book was printed, I had a chance to go to Tibet Monastery in Switzerland, though I didn't go to Tibet. And met with 14th Dalai Lama, and he blessed the book. He didn't know what, like, why am I showing him the book? I said, this is a new book, so I want you to see it. And he just said, give me the pen, and he signed it. So I said, now I have like the approval of him. But he was very nice. He was very, he gave some lectures there. And for me, it was incredible that we both met same person with my father in different times of life.
Incredible story how that intersects. And the Tibet, the secret of the red box, beautiful cover of that mandala that you've got there as well, which I'm looking at now, just absolutely beautiful. I'm curious about your relationship with art. You've you've kind of lived in this time of different sort of intersecting cultures. You've got repression and oppression, and then you've also got in the background, perhaps at the same time happening, in the West, which is maybe filtering through Europe, this kind of wave of freedom and artistic expression and sexual freedom and all of these things happening in the 60s, right? And so
right.
alongside that, and alongside clearly a talent that you had for drawing at a young age, what drew you to art, and what was the driving kind of force to just make you stick with it, which is what has created a career for you? Why art?
Yeah, I think I always loved to draw, and so drawing was in many ways for me escape from unpleasant things. So even like a little boy, my grandfather would be telling stories from First World War, traveling around the world, and I would draw pictures because it was nothing else. There was no television, no computers. I loved to read, but I also loved to draw. So I would draw day and night. And at some point, my parents said he will go to the art school. The art school brought lots of, like I think in all countries, the art schools are always, you find out about arts and music, but also you are critiqued by the people who were teaching there. But I was slowly getting these bits of information about things. And then came little things like the Festival of British Films, and you would see Hard Day's Night, or you would there was an effort on part of America to show how wonderful arts are in free world in America. So there was Louis Armstrong concert, Count Basie. There was exhibition of American graphics. There was Merce Cunningham ballet with. So there were little things because it was taken out of context. You had this idea that somewhere out there is the country where they just do arts, and it's just wonderful, and they are free, and they can do what they want. So even in my book, when I talk about it, this whole growing up, being a teenager, it's called The Wall, growing up behind the Iron Curtain. They would show us film. We all had to go the whole school to see film on Bowery, which was a famous documentary about people who are just drinking on Bowery. And everybody said, this is all fake film. This is all made by Russians, so they would make America look bad. So all these things were sort of taken like, no, they want to tell us bad things about the other side. So it was this great desire to get to the other side of the wall and to be free to do what you want. And then it's gonna be so fantastic because you're free and somebody will give you money and they're all hippies and it's all like Woodstock. And it sounds so naive. And it's when I talk to the kids, because of course then you find out it's not as it seems. And I think it would be impossible today because you would probably see pictures and get information on your iPhone. Yeah. And also it became this one interesting thing. I don't even know why the communist countries decided to build these walls, and it was against the law. It was criminal to try to climb the wall and try to escape, because if they caught you, you would be sentenced to a number of years to prison. So it was almost like a crime. You were taught at school like you never leave your country. You cannot go away, only bad people go away. So everybody knew it's an option. So there were always stories about somebody who climbed over the wall, who crawled under the wall, who swam across the big river, who got out of the plane and stayed in Canada. So this was continuously happening, and everybody kept it in their mind that at some point she might go somewhere else because she can't take or he can't take what's happening here. Again, it's impossible to explain out to people that this was the one of the issues in all these reality. And that was the thing with Berlin. When Berlin was open, people were leaving through the hole before the wall. So in 1961, the East Germans and Russians built the walls, and wall becomes the symbol of the divided city.
Yeah, keeping everyone in, but also keeping everyone out at the same time. Such an insane kind of monument. And so art clearly for you became a kind of a voice, and certainly something that, created an amazing path for you to reach the rest of the world, despite these walls, despite these kinds of curtains that, you may have first found yourself from. And when you were able to start to move into album covers and some of your animated films in the 80s as well. It was such an amazing body of work there as well.
So in the way, it was like I never was, I guess I was timid or didn't have the vision. I became very enthusiastic in '68 with this democracy movement with Dubček Černík, because I started to posters like human face socialism, and we're gonna do this, and we can play music, because it was the same time the first pictures from like London got in with all these purples and pinks, and it was going well with what I was doing. We had a rock band, so we played music. It all came together, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I went to England, and obviously I was looking just for things which would be symptoms of this music. So I would be in these rock festivals and seen the first concert of the Cream. Then I got work for a year later. I work in, I met, there was a concert in Prague of the group called Manfred Mann. Then I went to see Manfred Mann in England. I met the bass player, Klaus Vormann, who's the one who designed the record Revolver. He took me to a house, and we painted his cars with like all these psychedelic colors, which
awesome.
was cool. And he took me to Apple Records with the Beatles, and unfortunately, and that's again the story of my life, that they gave me a job to go to some garage or studio in Chelsea where I was gluing some stupid photographs on the wall, but I was paying for it. But I was like 18, and I was dying to be with all these fashionable people who have like purple shirts and Jimi Hendrix. I've seen Jimi Hendrix in the street. And so, and I'm instead like locked in the studio gluing photographs. And some man like came to me with like little glasses. I was like, so do you like what you're doing? And I said, no, I would like to be out. That's what's happening. They then paid me, I don't know, 50 pounds, and gave me one of the photographs of the people. And I think it was like a Gandhi or Jesus. It was completely like not like hip London. And then I'm going back to Prague. I was hitchhiking, and they took it away from me because they photographed giant head of Mahatma Gandhi. So only after years I realized I was working on the cover for Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band. But I didn't know it. So I thought, I have this stupid job gluing some photographs here. Instead, all the fashion is happening outside, and I'm doing this. And instead of, if I knew that, I would say, man, I was the one who was helping to make Sgt. Pepper.
Meanwhile,
so
one of the most
stories
iconic.
like that.
Incredible.
And so we met in some club with this wonderful woman, and she was like so much fun, and we ran around London, and was so easy, and she introduced me to lots of things. Like 2 years later, I found out she was Sandy Denny, who sang on these songs with, I don't know, with Robert Plant later. So 68, because of this, the Russians come, it's not like immediately everything is bleak. They were smart in the way that they were sort of tightening the screw slowly. So in 69, still, I had a show. I became a disc jockey. I got a radio show all of a sudden, because my father was a filmmaker, and he was making some film with Eckerbilk. There was a producer from England who gave me like 300 demo records. So all of a sudden I had most records from anybody in Prague. I got a radio show. I had played music 2 times a week in the club in Prague. Then they called me and said, would you be the compere of the show with Beach Boys? They are coming to Prague. So the Beach Boys came to Prague in the airplane, and we're on this tour of Czechoslovakia. So I would be the one who comes on the stage and goes like, ladies and gentlemen, here they are from California. The Beach Boys.
You got to meet them?
So I was traveling with them. I got to meet them. It was all that wonderful experience. Also in that time, I was like, Beach Boys, that's a little like, that's lame. We should do us wrong. So
oh my gosh,
now I think like Beach Boys they survive all this time. They play them some American
heroes. They're
heroes.
The American Beatles. Yeah, absolutely.
No, so I had a wonderful time. Only problem was that they were paid in Czech money, which you couldn't use anywhere else. And they asked me if they could meet with somebody who would sell them crystal glass or something they could take on the plane. You know, like the bands did it, that they got like paid in potatoes or something, and that they sold it somewhere else. And I was so naive that I thought all these black market people. I talked to somebody, I said, these Beach Boys have so much money and they would like to buy tons of this crystal glass. But I never heard about a country where people have a private planes and can fly from wherever they want. I thought they have to come in their plane to Prague, where the customs will, if you travel, you have to go through Prague.
Yeah.
They didn't have to go through Prague because the plane was theirs. They didn't need anybody. So the customs came to say goodbye to them in Brno, which is a very small place. And all of a sudden, the Beach Boys are in this small hut and have like
Incredible.
lots of money. I'm waiting. Where is the Crystal was in Prague? Beach Boys were in. They wanted to kill me. They were like chasing me around the airport. Where is the guy who's gonna get Crystal? So next year, then I had a tape recorder. I was working for the radio. I got this radio show every Friday evening, Saturday morning, where I would play all kinds of progressive music from all over the world. And I had a tape recorder, and I went to England, and I would do interviews with musicians. And it was from Jethro Tull to Robert Plant to
cool.
Don Sullivan. I met two of the Beatles. So I had all these recordings.
Which ones? Who did you meet?
I only met Ringo and George because, and I think the man who talked to me with the glasses when I was working on the Sgt. Pepper was John Lennon, but it's just because it was very dark and I was gluing these stupid photographs. It was like so. But anyway, I had this program, which of course, as lots of people said, got then cut down and I started to have I was in the art school in the meantime. So I was an art student at daytime. In the evening, I was a disc jockey. I became like the best known in Czechoslovakia. But it started to bring problems because the police would come and say, you said on Wednesday, 15th of April, that the president, and there was always things I supposedly said, I supposedly did.
Right.
People who could. So it started to be very unpleasant. You played music back in USSR. Nobody quite knew English or anything, but they said, this is against USSR. USSR is Soviet Union. You can't play or free. And it started to be very unpleasant because it was heavily sort of observed what do I play? My radio program got killed. And everything in the public life in 73 in the small country of Czechoslovakia started to be sort of tightened by the system.
Yes. Yeah.
I think if I look at it back, like when after the Second World War, when the people were enthusiastic to start new life, the young communists were enthusiastic to do things, and they had a censorship in the terms like people coming to tell them, you can't paint this or you can't. So they had different theories somebody was a censor who was saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. After the Russian army came in 68, it was a new rule that every artist is responsible for his own doing. So if you, by mistake, would paint a tree which looks like a profile of Lenin or something, then you became punished for that. And it became very difficult because sometimes you do things, you paint things, you put things in your film, which can have completely different meaning. And the life of the artist became very difficult because also if they wanted to if they wanted to punish you, they always found something what you did on record cover on the painting.
Yeah, of course, there was always a reason.
And that's also I went to the film because the film was to do with music. So my first film was a rock music, and the pictures were moving. So even in that art school, which started to be very political, when they said, so where do you have, this was supposed to be film about the Soviet army coming to liberate Prague, and you have some pink submarines flying in the sky. What is it? I said, this is just before the tanks will come in next, 5 minutes, but I didn't get to it yet. So I always had that excuse of time, while people who were doing paintings or sculpture, it was much more difficult because they didn't.
Yeah. So through all these years, after all of these revolutionary times that you were living in, from hanging out with the Beach Boys to meeting some of the Beatles, to then working in animated films and album covers, ultimately also going into children's books. You moved to the US. You did 17 years of work for the New York Times as well. It's a real long honorary kind of list to mention all of the work that you've done. I'm interested in particular with children's books and children's illustration. What took you to that side of things? And I ask because I've got a copy of one of your beautiful books here, which is the story of Nicholas Winton, the incredibly brave British man who, in the beginning of the Second World War, saved over 600 children's lives, getting them out of what would be invaded by the Nazis in Poland. So yeah, would just love to understand, what took you to wanting to tell children's stories.
So, to make a long story short, I'm in the art school. I'm the disc jockey. I make film about rock music. If this is all being unappreciated by the system, I can see it's difficult. And I leave the school, have to join the army, even I'm some sort of graphic designer, and want to continue with animation, make my first professional film. And second, all these films are like 7 minutes long. My second animated film gets the Golden Bear in West Berlin Film Festival then. So it was a major award. And based on that, I'm invited to Switzerland to make a TV series, and I'm invited to London to make a film in animation. So I can travel, but I can see that the Czech system uses, they take portion of whatever I'm paid to go through them, but also they use me as a sort of propaganda, like, look, this is the young man, and if you behave and if you make films like
Right.
or art, and I don't like it. I don't like it because I can see there is a contradiction between what's really happening and what they telling people, like, if you behave and if you great, you can do this. And most of all, I'm invited to come to America to make a short animated film for Olympic Games in 1984. So animation takes time. So I was invited 82 to come and make film, which would be one of the jingles or whatever for the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. And in that time, and this was the second time in my life when I got the cable, because it's again before internet, or they don't want to spend money on phones. But Soviet Union decides that they will boycott the Olympic Games in 1984. And so all the East satellite countries, all the little, also have to boycott the Olympic Games. So I get a cable, stop everything, return to Prague. And I'm in the middle of this short film about rowing and also making a song of Bob Dylan, You Got to Surf Nobody. And they say, drop everything, come back tomorrow. And I said, no, I have to finish it. I still have to animate half of the film. So I'm not leaving when they told me to, which already is a no-no if you're from the totalitarian country. And I start to negotiate with them, like, it's good for you if I finish this film, it's good for Czech animation, just give me 3 more months or 4 more months. And comes the time when they trying to talk me to go back. I'm trying to stay in America, getting the papers of sorts. I have H1 visa, but I don't have the green card. So eventually what happens anyway is that they declare me being, what do they call it? That I unlawfully left the country, and sentence me to 2 years in prison for not coming back. And I live for a short time in Los Angeles. Nobody wants my film. I sent some pictures to this famous children's book author in America, Maurice Sendak, who calls me collect in Los Angeles. It was funny because he says, if I call everybody who needs help, I would go broke. And then he says, how come you live in this? This is the worst part of America, Los Angeles and Hollywood. This is like a tinsel town. And I don't know what it all means because I've never been to any other part of America. And he says, you have to come to New York, or if you want to do children's books. And I didn't think about doing children's books, but if the best, most famous author of children's books tells me, I would do anything at that time. I was completely broke. So I got in the car without a map, driving across the America, which was sort of funny because I had to find my way. It was like mountains. I ended up near San Antonio, Texas at some point. So I was asking the trooper which way to New York. I came to New York. It was dark. It was difficult. I realized that I have to immediately make enough money to pay for the apartment. So I became an illustrator. And I got to New York Times, met men in New York Times who gave me work for next almost 20 years for the book review and op-ed. So I would work almost every week for the New York Times, and I developed special style. So people would remember me, which was a great idea
Wow.
because they did remember me, but it took me lots of time to make hundreds and thousands little dots to make these drawings with the dots. In that time, it was still like golden age of American illustration, which was that all magazines were using illustrators,
Yes.
paying
Those
sometimes.
classic
Well,
New
go
Yorker covers and
Time, Newsweek covers. They were still records, so you could still. It was just the last dying days of all this. But I had a privilege or honor to be still part of this incredible time. Also, it was great that sometimes if you did 4 little pictures for Time magazine, they gave you enough money that I could pay rent for a month. The books were another problem because books didn't pay much, and the books were they were black and white. You had to do color separation, and it was a lot of work. They paid almost like as much for the book as they paid for the illustration in some glossy magazine. Mind you, they wouldn't like my stories because they said these are crazy stories. This is not American story. So nobody would go for the stories. They were like, do you have anything about apple pie or ice cream baseball? I sort of knew nothing and still don't know much. Looking at my kids, it's fascinating that they know and I still don't know. And I've been here like 40 years. But I worked very, very hard, and I was getting books of other people to illustrate. And some of these books became famous, and I was getting more of the leverage. And then finally, like 3 years into this, in '87, I got a chance to do my first own book called Rainbow Rhino, which was very much a hippie book about the rhinoceros who, when he's happy, his horn turns like in rainbow colors. And in the way, it was a book about against immigration because he lives happily in the valley, and then he ventures outside of the valley, and there are all these dangers. So I became more and more known in children's books, even it wasn't my plan. And I went through next, I don't know, 10, 15 years, really like surfing on this wonderful wave of interest and enthusiasm. I have a feeling now it changed again after COVID because of me, maybe because of, me getting older. But I think it's very amazing to see how now children's books, which used to be so conservative, are now much more focused on what's going on, social changes in society.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into children's books, won all kinds of awards, and the book started to also be published in different countries, many different countries, also my old home country. And sometimes it creates dilemma because you would do it a little bit different for what is now Czechia, I don't want to say Czech Republic. But then it's interesting that each book, like one book can be popular in France, one can be popular in Spain. All of a sudden, one book is popular in Korea, or you have book published in China and they take out some of the things and you go like, hey, what happened? How did you take it out? Said, oh, it was a bad printing, but it wasn't bad printing. So say, I can't let you do this because you are like doing censorship or, without asking about it.
Yeah. At the children's book level. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shaping young minds, I suppose. Yeah. That's that opportunity that was before them. Your involvement as well with Amnesty International and also with the connection you have with Bill Shipsey, the founder of Art for Human Rights. Speak to me a little bit about that, how you got involved and some of the work and where that took you.
That happened gradually, and it was in the beginning. It was just like a favor. Of course, I knew Amnesty and the names, and I thought I believe in, but I had no connection to it. I don't know. But it started with Bill that I think there was some campaign, and he asked me for if I would have a picture, and I had a picture which I think was meaningful. And this is maybe 24 years ago. From small picture, they created this beautiful poster of birds bringing letters to the people who cannot. It's about, I think, almost people who are kept in prison and cannot communicate with outside. And for me, it was like that was just so wonderful. And then came some postcards and little cards, meaningful, and it gave me almost the same feeling like I had in '68, that I'm participating in something I believe in, that I can do something for the world when I feel I'm doing something good, because like even with the books, if I feel they are great for the kids, I'm being paid for it. I don't necessarily I want to feel it's for the better world, but it's also
Yes.
part of the business operation. Well, with Amnesty, this was purely, it was done on the basis that I donated my art, I created my art. And Bill, and then with Bill, we started to meet in connection with Prague and Václav Havel, and I could see like we have the same sort of ideas about it. And he then came, then somehow it built up that I was making the books, and first big job was really for when Václav Havel, who we both admired, passed. And one of my books about the Conference of the Birds, I would see him as the character from this book, and I brought him, the book was printed in September, I brought it to him in September, it was the dedication, and he was already not well, and then he passed in December, and I did like the painting of the man, which is made of many little birds flying over Prague as his memory.
Yeah,
and it was, the idea was like when the birds are flying like the pigeons above New York, and they turn in the beams of sun, it's like changing. So it was supposed to be like reminder of spirit of Václav Havel about Prague. And it was the cover of this magazine dedicated to his life. And Bill said this would be a great tapestry. And I thought it's joking. And he knew, like, we just talked about it the other day, he knew people who were weavers, who were artisans in France, but they were just about to retire. And there were these old, wonderful men who sat in like big kitchen, because the stand they're weaving on just filled the whole kitchen, and they for a year were making this tapestry, and then they brought it to Prague, and it was unveiled in the Prague airport, and it was just a wonderful feeling, because my little picture became this not only beautiful picture but also meaningful picture, because now everybody who travels through that takes a picture with that poster. And for me, it was another important issue when I could see the power of art like that, is the memory of this person, who still is so important, especially because of what's happening in Middle Europe and in the world. But then also there was this whole fight between good guys and bad guys, that people said you should call the airport Václav Havel Airport, and the people said, no, who was Václav Havel? But because of this beautiful tapestry, it just happened that they said this is Václav Havel's airport. So everything was working out just like great. And after that, we did, there was a Seamus Heaney, who's Irish like Bill, and whom I admire. He's now in the airport in the tapestry is hanging in Dublin. Then was Nelson Mandela in Cape Town, which gave me
I've seen that one. It's a beautiful one. Yeah.
And it was so wonderful, the reception, because I was coming to Cape Town, and I thought, what am I doing? I mean, when Nelson Mandela was this great person, and I'm somebody from outside who doesn't completely understand probably everything, and they just like were so generous and loved it, and was probably the most enthusiastic reception. Then there was one in New York, which I wanted to do for John Lennon, that is on Ellis Island, where all the immigrants used to come. And then I did a series, which was again for me incredible learning sort of curve, that Bill said, why don't you do civil rights? And I said, civil rights, coming to America so late, what do I know about American South? And I'm discovering these things even now, and it's very hard, because when I came to America, you think this is the country, this is what it is. And maybe I was thinking maybe about the blues music or some singers, but not about how people were given incredibly hard time and screwed up. And then discovering people like freedom riders, when we went down to Birmingham, Alabama, and then you see like there were these young people who got on the buses and went down south to educate people and to talk about freedoms, and they got like burned and killed, and this is the things again, like you don't much from my children's school books. You have to look for these things, but they are part of this country. So all these things became some sort of like memorials, like the paintings. Some of them could be better. I have like, of course, like the Flying Man, and I think Martin Luther King is great. And but anyway, it's just fantastic because I deal in children's books with lots of people who are African Americans, and then they are surprised that you did it. You did a tapestry for Martin Luther King. Give us the ballads, and then they go like, "But you had no reason to do that. Are you from some country like somewhere behind some mountains?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's like for all people, this is what makes all of us want to do better things. So we all do that. Like you can go to my little country behind the mountains and make some poster about somebody good too." So for me, it's a great satisfaction because it gives me some feeling I'm doing something good.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the purest way possible. Do you have is there a particular medium, because you're so prolific across different mediums? Is there a particular medium that is a first love for you, whether it's just drawing with a pen, or whether it's, putting together these incredibly elaborate tapestries?
No, it used to be the pen. I was very influenced. My father, when he, as a filmmaker, was bringing home books, which is, again, very hard to. I was in completely isolated country with no connection to the West, but my father kept on bringing books of Saul Steinberg. And Saul Steinberg was a man who became most famous sort of drawer of the magazine, like sort of black and white with little color aspects. So I did everything black and white. And in the 60s, I started to like these psychedelic colors I used. And I started to do oil pastels. But then I met my wife, we had a first child, and and I used to scratch the pastels. And she said, "What if the child will then, all the residue from your work?" So first she said, "You have to do watercolors," and then I had to find studio. So now I'm doing more watercolor. I'm not doing anything on the digital, which now is becoming really funny because like the old man who comes with the portfolio and insisted, "Oh man, you have it on the paper. So what are we gonna do with it? Like, why don't you send it?" So I can see that I sort of missed my moment when I could be digital and just ship it to them on the air. And now I go in person with my portfolio and people say, "Here's a funny suitcase." So that's just how it is.
Yeah. And do you, what are you busy with right now? I mean, do you have some stuff coming up? I mean, you're clearly an extremely busy man and like to stay busy. What does your working day look like now? Are you busy with something at the moment that you're working on and you're excited about coming up?
That's a very good question because I used to work on like regular basis. I had a studio in the city, which is like half an hour away where we are. Children were home. I went to the studio, came home in the evening. Studio is gone with COVID because just was too far, and it was in the city, which was in that time like deserted place. So I work from home, which makes it dangerous because sometimes you start to read something and it's midday. But I had a very hectic 3 months when I was asked to make a poem, illustrate a poem by the wonderful young poet Ada Limon. She's a poet laureate, and she wrote a book which is the tribute to our planet. It's called In Praise of Mystery, and she just talks about the water and the planet and where we're living and how we should be more responsible. And it's a little book, and this poem will be flying on the spacecraft of NASA to the Europa moon of Jupiter in October. And that I like because they said I could go and see I don't think it's going to be a big rocket, but maybe it will. And this book will be flying to the planet of Jupiter. I think it will be probably some chip.
Incredible. So that's what they mean when they say interstellar success.
Yeah, no, but it's good for especially for America because it's also sponsored by Library of Congress. It's about poetry. So little kids who now do not read books that much, do not read poetry. NASA who needs like the science. So I think it's all good things again, like on this day.
Incredible. So have you got any exhibitions or kind of events coming up where maybe if someone's going to be?
No, I just had one coming back from Japan, and we're talking about one in the fall. I'm going to Ireland now with Bill to talk about them. So when I have it, it would be great if you mention it.
Yeah. Talk about that, please. Yeah.
There was a big one in Prague. They said it was so big that they have to wait a few years so people will become interested again. So that was very touching because there were people coming with children and families. So I almost felt like it was too much of like a serious attention. But it's also because of all these projects which were about Václav Havel or about the 68. So I think it sort of is like a full circle for me.
Incredible. Well, I know that I speak for everyone at Art for Human Rights and everyone listening, where it feels like you're a national treasure.
It's a small country. My country, Czech Republic, is a small country. In America, national treasure would be a probably tall order. So thank you so much for.
No, it's so wonderful to talk to you and to just get a snapshot of some of the things that you've done in an incredibly vivid and colorful life, expressed through art and expressed through the experiences that you've had as well. And this particular book as well, Nikki and Vera, like I said to you in the beginning, it's something that I've read to my kids a couple times. And for me personally, I love how you take historical moments and things that are maybe like that American author who you first met so many years ago. These aren't necessarily the traditional kids stories that you find, but it's about taking things that are substantial and worth talking about and putting them into a format where young minds can understand them and enjoy them and take something from them. And hopefully when they grow up, that's something that they can hold on to as well.
Yeah, that was the idea that the world could use more people like Nicholas Winton, but I think we only know if they exist when the situation occurs like that. And when he had a chance to do something, he did something. The question for me is like, did I always do something when I could have done something? Probably not.
Yes.
What was amazing about this story from purely human brain side, that this story took place when I was a little boy. I would meet with my parents, their friends, and I knew that they were during the war in England, but nobody knew how they escaped the Nazis. And only in 1989, when I was already in the States, it became knowledge because of the exposure in England that this was this man who arranged for these trains. So even people I knew before who didn't know who saved them all of a sudden said, oh yeah, he was this. So it's an incredible story, and I would really recommend everybody it's also a film about him with Anthony Hopkins. And for me, also doing books when usually the heroes of the books, like in Galileo, Darwin, or Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, they lived some time ago. Here I was amazed that I met, and I'm still meeting these children who were on the train as little children. Now they are in their 90s. But they are like amazing people, because all these people who survive through the kindness of a stranger dedicated their life to help other people. If there were doctors, nurses, it's just fantastic, and they still do it. I mean, the Lord, I'm just trying to remember the Lord in England, who's one of these kids who came as a little boy, and he's now one of the biggest fighters for the especially young people who are trying to come to England and the change.
Yeah, it is an incredible story because of that. Just like you said, the kindness of a stranger who didn't have to. He could have just packed his bags and never worried about
his name. I just remember
again. And it's something that he's clearly had an effect where those people want to pay that forward as well in such a beautiful way. After so long, his
name is Alfred Dubs, Lord Alfred Dubs. And I think it's his name in Prague was Alfred Dubs, and the parents put him on the train. He came to England, and then he dedicated his whole life to be really fighting for people who are refugees, not because of what's happening in the world. And I think his whole family then vanished in the Holocaust.
Yeah, just incredible. The spirit of selflessness, so admirable. Yeah, beautiful. Certainly something we could all use a bit more of in our day and age. Yeah. Yeah, Peter, it's been such a wonderful honor to talk to you. I really hope that I get the chance again to have another conversation and catch up with where you are in the world and what you're up to. And I know that Bill is excited to keep collaborating with you as Art for Human Rights continues its march forward. So thank you again. Appreciate your
Thank
time.
you so much, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Art for Human Rights with Peter Sis. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to now leave you with some words, in Peter's own words, about Sir Nicholas Winton, the man who bravely saved nearly 700 children leaving Czechoslovakia at the time the Nazis were invading at the start of the Second World War. I was always looking up to celebrated adventurers, explorers, inventors, and dreamers. But I had not paid enough attention to the reluctant and quiet heroes. Here was a man who would see something wrong and do something to correct it, but who never claimed to be a hero. Thanks for listening. To check us out and to learn more about what we do and to support us, go to artforhumanrights.org. Until next time.